I was at the airport with my suitcases, waiting for my son to show up with the tickets for our family trip, when the phone rang. "Dad, we're already on the plane. You're not coming." In the background, I heard Amber, his wife, give a small, satisfied laugh. Finally, a vacation without the old man. My hands shook with anger, but right then I knew they'd come to regret it. Before we go further, hit subscribe and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I stood in the middle of Denver International Airport, the whole terminal humming like a beehive, a low, constant buzz of rolling suitcases and tired voices. My old roller bag, the handle worn smooth after years on the road, rested against my shin. From the nearest kiosk drifted the bitter smell of scorched coffee. Over the loudspeaker, a garbled announcement called final boarding for a flight to Phoenix. I checked my watch. 9:17 a.m. Jake should have been here already, tickets in hand, ready to head out for the family vacation to Hawaii I'd planned down to the hour. I tapped my dead black phone screen, like that would coax a message out of it. Where was he? I shifted my weight. My knees complained the way 68-year-old knees do, a dull ache wrapping around the joints. The crowd flowed in eddies around me. A mother tugging a squirming toddler in dinosaur pajamas, a man in a blazer arguing into a headset, a cluster of teenagers taking videos of themselves and laughing at nothing. I scanned faces for Jake's quick stride and square jaw. Nothing. My stomach pulled tight. Traffic, probably, I told myself. Or maybe Amber had slowed him down. She could turn a 10-minute walk into 20 with one more pass at her makeup. The phone buzzed in my palm, a short to sharp shock. Jake's name lit the screen. Relief rose quick and hot. I answered, "Hey, kid, where are you?" "I'm by the check-in counters." A silence stretched too long. Then his voice came through, flat as a piece of paper. "Dad, we're already on the plane. You're not coming." It felt like a punch I never saw coming. The terminal noise dropped away. All I heard was my own breath and the dry rasp of the speaker against my ear. "What do you mean I'm not coming?" I asked. My voice cracked. I gripped the suitcase handle. The leather creaked. Another pause. Then Amber's voice slid through from somewhere behind him, soft and mean at the same time. "We'll finally get a vacation without this old man," she giggled. It sliced. I tried to speak, but Jake cut me off. "Look, Dad, it's better this way. You slow us down. We'll talk when we're back." The line went dead. I stood there with the phone to my ear, staring at its blank screen like it might apologize. The terminal surged back to life announcements, rolling wheels, chatter, but everything sounded muffled, as if I were hearing it through water. Heat climbed up my chest shock first, then rage. They were on the plane I paid for. I'd planned the whole thing, the hotel, the rental car, which beach had the calmest water in the mornings, imagining warm sand, and maybe one of those rare days when my son laughed with me, and they left me at the curb like an extra piece of luggage. Amber's words rattled around my skull. Without this old man. I made my legs move. The suitcase wheels squeaked as I dragged it across the polished floor. People shifted to let me pass, faces blurring into a smear of color. The coffee kiosk smell turned sour as I went by. I headed for the exit. In my coat pocket, my fingers found the house keys I'd pocketed out of habit. Cold metal, something solid. Unlike my son's promises. Outside, April air cut straight through my jacket. A row of yellow cabs idled along the curb, drivers standing together and talking with their hands. I raised my arm, one pulled forward. The driver was wiry, with a salt and pepper beard and tired eyes. He popped the trunk, hefted my suitcase in like it weighed nothing, and glanced up. "Rough morning?" he asked. I didn't bother answering. I slid into the back seat. The door thumped shut, and the faint smell of pine air freshener boxed me in. My hands still shook. My knuckles looked bloodless. Amber's giggle replayed in a loop, each little note pouring gas on the fire. They thought they could humiliate me and fly off into the sunshine. They were wrong. The driver settled in and checked the mirror. "Hey, friend, you okay? Where are we headed?" I stared out the window. The airport slid away behind us. In the glass, my reflection moved over the passing road. Grey hair, lined face, eyes harder than I recognized. They'd regret this. That much I knew. "Kinda need a destination," the driver said, easy, curious. The keys in my pocket dug into my thigh. I unclenched my hands. "Home," I said, low and steady. "Just take me home." The taxi hummed along I-70, rain streaking the windows in thin, crooked lines. Denver's skyline blurred to a grey smudge under the dull April sky. I folded my hands in my lap so I wouldn't notice them trembling. The radio played soft jazz underneath the patter of rain and the occasional squeak of wipers. The car smelled like warm leather and a memory of cigarettes. "You sure you're all right back there?" the driver asked after a minute. I lifted my eyes to the rear view. His were brown and creased at the corners, hair silver at the temples. The red name tag on his faded jacket read Ray. "Fine," I said, and it came out rough. Ray didn't seem like a man who let silence sit too long. "Airport's a circus this time of year," he said, chuckling. "Drop-offs, pick-ups. Makes me miss my kids, though. They're scattered all over now. You got family waiting at home?" My jaw tightened. The word family felt like some sharp thing I'd bitten down on. I pictured Jake's blank tone and Amber's mean little laugh. The keys in my pocket bit my palm when I squeezed them. "Something like that," I said, and turned back to the window. Ray let the quiet stretch for a while. Outside, the rain thickened and blurred the lanes. I stared at the water running sideways across the glass and wandered further back in time, like my mind couldn't help itself. Jake at 20 eyes bright as I held out the keys to a used car I'd saved overtime for. He put his arms around me and promised he'd make me proud. Or the day of his wedding, when Amber floated down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my pension for the month. I paid the bill and smiled for pictures. She thanked me without looking up, mouth twisted as she whispered the venue felt old-fashioned. My house where they lived rent-free was old-fashioned too. I heard her say it in my kitchen last month while she drank my coffee. Rain hit the roof harder. I thought of the checks I'd written. Tuition, down payments, repairs. For what? So they could strand me at a gate and laugh. "You ever feel like you gave too much?" I asked before I could stop myself. The question fell out raw. Ray glanced up at me in the mirror. "To family," he said. "Plenty of times. Gave my kid my old pickup when she moved to Seattle. She sold it a month later, didn't even mention it." He shook his head and kept his voice gentle. "But that's how love works sometimes. You give because you love. Doesn't always come back the way you hope." I nodded. My throat tightened. Love. I had loved Jake past empty gas tanks, past overdue notices, past all the little ways he kept backing away, shorter calls, rare visits, quick exits. I kept telling myself it was work, marriage, growing up. The call at the gate smashed that story to pieces. The cab slowed and turned into my neighborhood. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, flags faded from winter. Somehow all of it looked smaller. Ray pulled into my driveway. The tires crackled over wet gravel. My place rose up in front of us. A two-story with white paint peeling where the afternoon sun hit hardest. Porch boards that sagged and squeaked after rain. "Home, sweet home," Ray said, turning the meter. "That'll be 28. 50. I handed him 30 and waved off the change. Keep it. My voice felt steadier now. The rain misted down as I grabbed my suitcase. For a second, I just stood under the overhang and looked at the door like it might look back. The key's weight steadied me. Take care, Ray called from the window. Family stuff never looks as bad once you're past it. I gave a small nod. He drove off, his taillights smeared red through the drizzle. I turned to the house I'd kept standing for decades, the place I thought I'd be sharing with a family that wanted me around. The keys were slick and cold in my palm. A hard, simple thought slid into place. They were not walking all over me again. Inside, the door gave its familiar creak. The sound spread through the quiet rooms. I set the suitcase just inside. The faded rug swallowed the thud. Stale coffee and last week's lavender cleaner hung in the air. 2 floors, chipped paint, floors that signed their names with every step, every inch of it bought with small paychecks and long days. Now it felt like a museum of bad habits I never broke. I shuffled into the kitchen without taking off my coat and punched the coffee maker on. Its low rumble filled the silence. I lowered myself into the old armchair by the window. The springs complained, same as always. Across from me, a shelf held framed snapshots. Jake missing a front tooth and beaming. Us holding a fish he caught at 15. His wedding day, me grinning wide enough to hurt, while Amber smiled like someone had asked her to pose with a stranger. How did it get here? You're not coming. Without this old man. My hands itched for something to break, but I locked my palms on the armrests instead. I'd paid for school, for cars, for a roof. They paid me back with a phone call that tore me out of my own plans. I paced the kitchen until the coffee maker beeped done. I didn't pour a cup. My eyes drifted to the keys I'd dropped on the counter. They flashed in the fluorescent light like little bars of bright metal. This house was mine. This life was mine. I wasn't a burden just because they decided I was. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the bank. The number sat there like a dare. I hovered my thumb over call and stopped. Not yet. Not without a plan. I wasn't Jake rushing, and I wasn't Amber smiling while she tugged a string. Whatever I did next would be careful. I wandered into the living room and ran my hand over the back of the couch, where Jake used to sprawl and ask for money for some must-have gadget. "Dad, you don't get it," he'd say. He never wanted to talk about saving. Amber's little digs cut cleaner than knives. "This house is so dated," she'd told me, tilting a glass of wine I'd bought. "You should redo the kitchen." Like I hadn't built a life in these rooms. On the mantel, there was a photo of Jake at graduation. I'd taken extra shifts to cover the years he got serious. He hugged me then and said he'd make me proud. I see now he meant it for the moment and not much beyond that. I swallowed past the sting. No tears. Not for this. I thought of the way they cut me out at the airport like ripping a tag off a shirt. They decided I was easy to ignore, always going to say yes. That man, the one they left at the gate, was done. I tugged the curtain aside. The front lawn looked as patchy as I'd left it before winter. The street was quiet, rain easing to a thin mist. Across the way, my neighbor's porch light glowed. Nancy would probably understand how this felt. She'd been through some storms of her own. But this fight didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. I let the curtain fall. The bank's number still glowed on my phone. I picked up the keys from the counter and rolled them in my hand. Their weight said something simple. Do it. Enough, I said, into the quiet house. It sounded steady. You'll see. In the study, my old desktop gave a low whir and threw a pale glow across stacked paper. The rain softened to a faint tick on the window. The silence in the house pressed at my ribs. The bank's number stared back from my phone. I could feel my heart in my throat while I hesitated. I pictured Jake signing my card for overpriced drinks he'd forget by morning, and Amber's whisper, finally, a vacation without the old man. The burn of the memory loosened my thumb. No more. I hit call. Frontier Trust Bank. This is Denise speaking. How can I help today? Calm voice, steady. This is Thomas Walker, I said. I didn't recognize my own steadiness. I need to make changes to my account. Now. Of course, Mr. Walker. For security, let's verify a few details. I gave her what she asked for. Keys, dates, numbers. I could have listed every account blindfolded. While she typed, my eyes found the house keys on the desk again. They caught the monitor's light in 2 bright bars. Thank you, she said after a minute. What would you like to change? I want to remove access for my son, Jake Walker, and his wife, Amber Walker. They're authorized users on my secondary card. That ends today. Understood. Is the removal permanent? Yes. The word came out like a nail set with one clean hit. All right, she said softly. I'll need the last 4 digits of the card. I read them off. Part of me, the stubborn part that still saw a 10-year-old with a fishing pole, wanted to hang up, pretend this wasn't happening. But the call at the gate lived too close to the surface now. I wasn't a wallet with a heartbeat. I was a father they'd chosen to mock. Okay, Mr. Walker, Denise said. I've removed Jake and Amber Walker as authorized users. It's effective immediately. Would you like email confirmation? Yes, I said. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you. Anything else I can help with? That's all. I ended the call and stared at the cooled coffee on the desk. A thin skin had formed on top. I'd done it. First step. Relief and worry twisted around each other in my gut. What would they do when they found out? Scream. Beg. A small, hard part of me wanted to hear it. I got up and looked out at the damp yard. Across the mist, Nancy's porch light still glowed. She'd be up with tea, ready to talk about her roses. But I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. I picked up the keys. Their edges pressed little half-moons into my palm. This house, this life, it belonged to me. The phone buzzed. Jake's name pulsed on the screen. I didn't open it. Not yet. Let him stew. I pocketed the phone and kept the keys in my hand. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street lay still. Too still. I sat back down and let my mind do something it hadn't done in a long time. Play out how they would feel when a waiter slid a declined card back across a table. I could see them in Hawaii, Jake in a loud shirt, Amber tapping the stem of a wine glass with one shiny nail. The restaurant with big open windows and linen on the tables. The air smelling like plumeria and salt. A polite waiter with a careful smile returning with a card that wouldn't run. I'm sorry, sir, he'd say. It was declined. Jake's smile would vanish and then snap back like a mask. Run it again. He'd lean closer, like confidence could fix a terminal. The second run would fail. I pictured the color rising in his face. Amber would stay very still. Then she'd lean toward him and hiss. What did you do? He'd say, It's not me, and dig for his phone. He'd try the bank and get lost in the menus. Amber's eyes would sharpen and cut sideways. It's him, she'd say, low. Your father. Back in my study, the phone buzzed again. I let it buzz. I knew what was coming. I thumbed the speaker on and let the voicemails stack. Dad, what the hell? Jake's voice bounced between panic and anger. The card's not working. We're stuck. Fix it, now. Then Amber, smooth but icy. Thomas, this isn't funny. You're ruining our trip. Unblock the card. Pathetic, she might as well have added. It sounded like what she meant. I pictured them in their hotel room, the kind with an ocean view that cost extra for how the light hit the water, arguing while the waves kept being waves. Jake pacing, calling me, calling the bank, calling me again. Amber perched on the end of the bed with her arms crossed, calculating next moves. "You said he'd never do this," she'd spit. "Don't start," he'd snap. "He's never gone this far." "He has now," she'd say. "Call Tyler. He owes you. He'll talk to your dad." Another voicemail lit up the screen. I played it. Jake's voice tried for dangerous and landed on desperate. "You think you're clever. You'll regret this." I set the phone down. The pulse in my neck finally slowed. They could thunder all they wanted. The power had moved. On my desk, a tidy stack of papers waited for the next right thing. The keys beside them threw off a stubborn little shine. I wasn't done. The lawyer's office smelled like polished wood and old leather, the scent of decisions you can't unmake. I sat across from Mr. Bennett, a square-shouldered man with wind-worn features and half-moon glasses. His pen scratched across a legal pad. The folder I'd brought lay open between us, papers fanned like a deck of hard choices. Outside, downtown Denver hummed, horns, footsteps, the low growl of a bus. But in here, the only sound was the clock ticking in soft, certain beats. "So, Thomas," Bennett said, peering over his frames. "You're sure about this? Removing Jake completely from the will?" I nodded, fingers laced together to keep them still. "I'm sure." Saying it tightened something in my chest. For half a heartbeat, I saw Jake at 16, grinning with a trout held out toward the camera. Then, yesterday's threat. "You'll regret this," flashed over it. I pushed both away. "He's made his choices," I added. Bennett's pen paused. "Family matters have a way of shifting. If you change your mind later, there's more paperwork, more expense. You still want to proceed?" A breath stuck behind my ribs. I thought of his birthday last month, the cheerful voicemail I left and the text I got hours later. "Busy, Dad. Talk later." No call ever came. I heard Amber's cool little digs in my kitchen. The gateside call rung in my ears. "Yes," I said. "Let's proceed." He nodded, jotting. "I'll draft a new will that revokes prior bequests. You'll need to sign with a witness. Straightforward." He clicked his pen and slid a form toward me. "Any specific bequests? The house? Accounts?" "The house stays with me," I said. "No new beneficiaries today." "I'll decide later." "Fair enough." He made a final note. "We'll have it ready by tomorrow. Stop in to sign." I stood and shook his hand. The folder under my arm felt like a shield. As I reached the door, a familiar voice called, "Thomas, is that you?" I turned. Nancy Carter stood in the hallway with a takeout coffee. Her gray curls tucked into a scarf, smile easy, eyes bright and tired in the same breath. Steam lifted from the sipping hole in lazy swirls. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, warmth wrapped around curiosity. Her gaze flicked to the folder and back. "You got a minute? There's a cafe across the street. My treat." I started to protest and found I didn't have it in me. "Sure," I said. "A minute would be good." We crossed to the cafe and slid into a corner table. It was small and bright. The smell of beans and cinnamon, low music, the clink of porcelain. Nancy rested her forearms on the table and studied me like she was reading fine print. "You look like a man with a plan," she said. "Tell me the headline." I gave her the short version, the airport call, the bank, the will. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Good," she said, without hesitation. "You're drawing a line. People who take and take don't stop until you draw one." She sipped, then added, "When Tom died, my cousin showed up with flowers and a forged signature. Family isn't a magic word." Her bluntness felt like a warm coat in cold air. "I keep wondering if I've gone too far," I said. He's still my son. He is? She said. Eyes kind, voice firm. And he's a grown man who left you at a gate and laughed about it. You gave him more than enough. Now you give yourself something. Peace. I nodded. The knot behind my ribs eased a little. We talked a while, her garden, my creaky porch, the weather pretending it might clear. When we parted on the sidewalk, she squeezed my forearm. If you need a witness tomorrow, holler, she said. I'm excellent at reading fine print out loud. I smiled for real. I might take you up on that. I turned the corner toward my street and stopped dead. A sleek black sedan was nosed into my driveway. Tinted windows. Engine off, but it looked coiled, like it might move if I did. Tyler's car, Jake's friend since high school, flash without ballast. I gripped the folder tighter and kept walking. The sedan was empty. Whoever had been in it was gone. The hair on my arms still stood up. Dusk deepened into night. I was thumbing through an old photo album in the living room, the lamp throwing long shadows over the rug, when headlights washed the windows and tires crackled over gravel. The doorbell rang, sharp and sure. I opened the door. Tyler stood under the porch light, broad-shouldered in a leather jacket that flashed rain. The smile he gave me showed a lot of teeth and none of them friendly. "Evening, Thomas," he said, voice smooth as a sales pitch. "Mind if I come in?" I didn't move. "What do you want, Tyler?" He leaned in half an inch, lowering his voice like we were conspirators. "Quick word about Jake and Amber. You've got them in a tight spot." "They put themselves there," I said. "Say what you came to say." "The card," he said, still playing casual. "They're stranded in Hawaii. Can't pay for a thing. You need to fix that." "It's my money," I said evenly. "My decision. They don't get to demand from me anymore." The smile fell away, and something hard clicked into place behind his eyes. He stepped closer. I smelled the gallon of cologne, before the rain on his jacket. "Come on, Thomas," he growled softly. "Don't make this messy. He's your son. He deserves your help." "Deserves. Like you deserved the $500 I loaned you," I said, not raising my voice. "Tell Jake he's on his own. Both of them are." His jaw flexed. "You're making a mistake, old man. Jake won't let this go. He's got plans, and you won't like them." "Tell him to try me," I said. "Off my porch." He held my eyes one beat too long, then snorted and stepped back. "This isn't over," he said, jabbing a finger toward the door as if it had ears. He stomped down the steps, slammed his door, and tore off. I slid the deadbolt and stood still until my breath evened out. They thought they could frighten me back into line. They were a step late for that. I lifted the curtain and watched his taillights shrink. Crickets threaded the quiet. On the coffee table, my house keys caught the lamp and threw a small, stubborn flare of light. This was my home. I intended to keep it that way. Morning came crisp and damp. The park felt rinsed, clean grass beating up water, pink petals drifting down from the trees and catching in my coat. I walked with my hands deep in my pockets, thinking of Bennett's papers, Tyler's warning, the line I'd drawn. I slowed, beside a weathered bench, and sat. Cold crept through my jeans. A memory hit so sharp it felt like I'd bitten my tongue. Jake at 10, sprinting ahead through this same park with a fishing pole bouncing off his shoulder. "Come on, Dad!" He'd laughed like sunlight on the pond. For a minute the doubt rolled in like fog, cutting him off, changing the will. Was it too far? He was my son, even if he'd made himself a stranger. "Thomas?" Nancy's voice warm behind me. I turned. She stood with Buddy, her scruffy terrier, who was already plastered to my shins, sniffing like he had a job to do. Nancy's knit cap had damp petals clinging to it. You've got the look, she said, dropping onto the bench. Like you're wrestling a bear nobody else can see. I huffed a laugh. I keep seeing him, little, I said. It makes it hard to be firm with the man he is now. Of course it does, she said, but that man left you on a curb and laughed. You're not wrong for wanting respect. She looked out over the path. When people show you what they'll do with your trust, believe them. I stared at Buddy's lopsided ears and felt the truth of it slide into place. You're good at this, I said. I've had practice, she said dryly. Come on, walk me back and I'll let you make us tea. We took the slow way home. In my kitchen, the kettle sang, and chamomile rolled through the air. Nancy wrapped her hands around a mug and pinned me with a look that said there would be no half measures left on the table. So, she said lightly, what's next? I glanced at the folder on the counter. The draft was tucked inside like a loaded sentence. I finish it, I said. All of it. Locks, too. She nodded. Good. Then softer. And I'm around if you need a hand. The drill's whine chewed through the hallway an hour later. High, relentless, final. The locksmith, a lean guy named Gus, with a toolbox that sounded like a jar of coins, had sweat beading his temple. The air smelled like metal shavings and fresh paint, laid over the old house smell that never quite left. Almost there, he said, snugging a screw. Want me to do the back door too? Already handled, I said. Just make this one solid. He nodded, wiped his brow, and leaned in again. Big day, he offered. Done a few of these. Not easy. I only gave him a tight smile. He didn't need my history. The new keys were a warm, weighty circle in my pocket, a bright line I'd drawn across my own threshold. Upstairs, Jake and Amber's bedroom door hung open. The room looked like a still frame of everything I should have confronted years ago. Clothes slung across the bed, a mug with a ring of old coffee on the nightstand, a tangle of charger cords on the floor. I hauled a stack of flattened boxes from the hallway and popped them open. Amber's dresses, first thin silk, sliding like water between my fingers. Then Jake's Gadget's headphones, the smartwatch I gave him last birthday, face smeared with prints. Each item tugged at a memory, but each memory let go easier than I expected. Fold, stack, tape. It felt less like packing and more like reclaiming space inside my chest. A glossy photo sat on the dresser, Jake and Amber on a beach, sunglasses, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I dropped it into the box without a pause. They could keep their pictures. They weren't keeping my house. Downstairs, Gus called up, "All set, Mr. Walker. Want to test the keys?" "Coming," I said, palming the tape gun. I carried the last box down, the weight dragging at my shoulders. Outside, the lawn was cool and damp under my shoes. I lined the boxes along the side yard, in a neat row, the kind of order I wish I'd set earlier in my life. I pulled a note card and pen from my shirt pocket and wrote, "You don't live here anymore." I slipped it just under the top flap of the front box. Clean. Final. The door creaked behind me. Nancy stepped out, scarf lifting in the breeze. She'd come back to check on me, like she said she would. "Well, I'll be," she said, taking in the row of boxes. "You do not hesitate." "Had to be done," I said, brushing damp cardboard from my palms. "They're going to go nuclear," she said, not unkindly. "You ready for what comes with that?" "They've had years of chances," I said. "I'm done waiting for them to become new people." She tipped her head. "Good. But stay sharp. People who are used to taking don't always walk away clean." Gus came out with his toolbox. "Locks are tight," he said, handing me a small silvered ring. The new keys flashed in the late light. "Anything else?" That's all, I said, sliding them into my pocket where they felt heavier than a house should weigh. Appreciate it. He tipped his cap and rumbled off in a van that looked older than both of us. Nancy and I stood a minute, listening to leaves stir against one another. The boxes looked like a row of small endings. You did good, she said after a bit. This house is yours again. I nodded, swallowing around a lump I hadn't expected. I turned toward the door. That's when I heard it, faint and steady, a distant airplane stitching a low thread through the sky. My grip on the keys tightened. My pulse answered in my ears. They were on their way back. The living room was warm, coffee steaming in a mug I hadn't finished. The lamp pooled soft light across the frayed rug, each thread a little map of footsteps I'd taken for years. Outside, May settled over the neighborhood cool air, a hint of rain waiting in it. Headlights swept across the curtains, gravel crackled under tires. They were back. I stood and eased the fabric aside. Jake and Amber climbed out of a taxi, suitcases thudding onto the drive. Jake's shirt hung wrinkled, his hair stuck up in wrong directions. Amber clutched her designer bag like a lifeline, heels ticking too loud in the quiet. They looked smaller under the streetlight's hard white. I didn't move. I watched. Jake jammed his key into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, muscles bunching in his shoulders. "What the hell?" he said, loud enough to carry. "Try it again," Amber snapped. "You're doing it wrong." "I'm not," he shot back, ramming the key. The new lock held. He slapped the door with his palm. The sound popped like a firecracker in the still night. "Dad, open the door!" I kept breathing, steady as the second hand on the clock. "Dad, I know you're in there," he shouted, pounding with both fists. "Stop this, and let us in." Amber pinched his arm hard. "Keep yelling, invite the whole block," she hissed. "Brilliant." Then her eyes slid past him toward the side yard and narrowed. "What is that?" They drifted toward the row of boxes. I leaned closer to the window's edge. Jake clawed open the first one. Amber's silk dresses slid out like water in the porch light. He froze, then dug into another headphones, the smartwatch I'd given him for his birthday. He packed our stuff, he said, voice catching. Amber yanked a note card from under the top flap, hands trembling as she read. "You don't live here anymore," she said, louder with each word. "Your things are behind the house. Clear the yard by tomorrow." Her mouth went tight. She tore the card in two. Paper fluttered to the wet grass. Unbelievable. Jake spun back to the door and hammered until his fists had to hurt. "You think this is funny, Dad? Throwing us out like trash? You're heartless." Amber stepped in beside him, knocking in a sharp rhythm. "Thomas, open this door right now. You can't do this to us." I let the curtain fall, their voices dulled to a storm on the other side of a sealed window. My chest felt tight but clean. This wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. They'd used my trust like it was endless and treated my roof like the ceiling of a hotel I owed them. Now all they had was what fit in their hands. My phone lit up with Jake's name, buzzed, went dark, lit again. I set it on the table and didn't touch it. The pounding ebbed. A taxi's engine revved. When I looked again, they were dragging suitcases toward the curb. Rain began in a fine thread, streaking the glass, smearing the streetlights. The kitchen smelled faintly of chamomile from the last boil of the kettle. I stood in the doorway, watching drizzle bead the window. My phone buzzed on the table. I hit play on the first voicemail. "Dad!" "Come on," Jake said, breath hitching. "This is crazy. You can't just lock us out. Where do we even go? Open the door, please." The next message was Amber, voice smooth, edges rounded like she sanded them herself. Thomas, we messed up. I see that. Just let us in and we can talk. Please. I had heard this exact melody before, apologies shaped to fit a lock. I set the phone down and watched them from the sliver of window. Their suitcases sagged under the weight of rain. The cardboard I'd set out began to slump and give. Jake's shoulders drooped. His hands went into his pockets like they were searching for answers there. Amber paced with her phone to her ear, voice tight and clipped. I pictured the ride they'd take to a cheap motel on the edge of town. I could practically smell the damp hallway, see the flicker of a neon sign outside the window. In a tight room with thin carpets, Jake would sink onto the bed, elbows on knees, face in his hands. Amber would wear a track in the linoleum with her pacing. "You said he wouldn't do this," she'd hiss, careful to keep the volume down. "You said he was too soft." "I didn't think he'd go this far," he'd snap back, dragging a hand through his hair. "He's never done anything like this." "You should have known," she'd fire, tossing her bag onto the bed. "Leaving him at the airport was your idea. He'll get over it, you said. Look where we are." "Don't dump this on me," he'd say, standing too fast. "You kept pushing, nagging about his house. His money like it was a faucet he forgot to turn off." Her eyes would flash. Her voice dropped to ice. "We're not done. We go back tomorrow. We beg if we must. He'll crack." The kettle was still faintly warm under my palm when I came back to myself. The phone buzzed again. I didn't check it. Their panic was a map of how much they'd built on what I provided. Without it, their scaffolding had nothing to hold. I poured a mug and sat at the table. The wood creaked under my elbows. A small note card peeked from under a pile of bills. Nancy's looping hand. Coffee tomorrow. Anne. I smiled despite myself. She'd been a steady line through all the noise. Tomorrow I'd tell her everything. Rain tapped out a slow rhythm. Outside, the yard finally emptied. The soggy boxes slouched like tired shoulders. They were gone. I was still here. The cafe felt like a pocket of sun the next morning, warm air, espresso hiss, platters of pastries under glass. I sat across from Nancy with my hands wrapped around a mug, hot enough to seep into bone. Her grey curls bounced when she leaned forward. "So," she said, spoon tracing a little circle in her latte. "How's it feel to be king of your castle again?" I let out a laugh I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. "Right," I said. "Quiet, but right." "Good," she said, tapping the spoon once on the rim. "You did what you had to. Not many do." "The calls kept coming last night," I said. "They said they were sorry, swore they'd change, asked to come back." Her eyebrow climbed. And I don't believe a word," I said. "It's the same tune they always sing when they want access. I'm not dancing to it anymore." "Then you protected yourself," she said. "They made a bed. Let them try sleeping in it." I nodded. I'd listened to Jake's final message. "Dad, please, give us a chance," and deleted it. Amber's voice was smoother, like she was wrapping steel in velvet. But the point was the same. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry the tap was off. Clarity can feel like putting down a heavy pack after a very long walk. We talked longer than we meant to. Her plan for roses, my plan for a new porch step before someone went through it. "You should help me plant," she said, eyes glinting. "Dirt under the nails solves more than most therapists." "Maybe I will," I said, and meant it. Back at the house, the kitchen filled with the smell I hadn't made room for in years. Apples and cinnamon, sugar and butter. I'd decided to bake a pie. My hands worked like they remembered. Dough rolled thin, edges crimped, apples sliced and tossed in spice until the bowl gleamed with syrup. There had been a time when Jake waited for me to look away so he could swipe a spoonful of the filling and grin around it. The memory didn't hurt the way it used to. It just sat there, a photograph the sun had bleached soft. The front door creaked. Nancy stepped in like she'd lived here all her life. In her hands, a small bouquet of daisies, stems wrapped in damp paper towel. "For the garden," she said, slipping them into a vase by the window. "Figured they'd brighten the joint." "They do," I said, sliding the pie into the oven. The oven door closed with a snug home sound. Sunlight spilled in and lit the daisies in a soft halo. She settled at the table. "We should do a little dinner," she said. "You, me, a couple of neighbors. Mark the new chapter with something that smells like butter." I wiped my hands on a towel. "I'd like that." "You're going to be okay, Thomas," she said, fingers tracing the vase's rim. "Better than okay." I nodded and let it land. The oven hummed, the pie's scent thickened, and warmth moved through the house like it had been waiting outside a long time for me to open the door. I thought about Jake and Amber somewhere across town, trying to figure out life without me propping the corners. I didn't wish them harm. I wished them distance, space for both of us to learn what we should have known already. This house, this life, mine again. For the first time in years, the word home sat right in my mouth. Sunlight slid across the counter and turned the wood to gold. The daisies held their little burst of morning like a secret. I stood and let the moment settle its weight around me. Whatever came next, I was ready to meet it at the door. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.